The Fargo Five. I'm Conrad Fargo. We've got in the show.
You want me to help on
Greg,
Conrad?
Greg, so the only other time I've had such a mess, and it was another almost like high-level interview, was with Patrick Kirby. Is that a name known to you? He runs Do Good. And the whole time I was wrestling with because it's in my head to deal with these technical difficulties, and so I just can't get up and off the ground because, like, in the back of my head, it's like, oh, we got to fix this. Let it be and do the show.
That's right.
Let's do the show, right? You're an old hand at this, though. You've done a bunch of radio interviews before.
Well, for other things, but not for the band. No,
not for the band. Not for the band.
Not for the band. No.
Okay. Well, so this is the Fargo Five, and what we do is we talk about a lot of things. It's kind of a longer form, more of a podcast. You said you're a podcast listener.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I like to start with is to figure out what the hell made you want to be what you are, and you're in a band.
Yeah.
Where does that even come from? How long have you been doing bands? You've been doing this. So when you're late stage as you are, as we discussed before the show, right? Like,
right.
You've been doing this a long time. But where does the idea to even be? Have you been doing bands your whole life, or where did it all start?
Close. The name of the band is Stella.
Yeah.
And we've been together now since the COVID days, so we're going on 5 years. And we play, pretty much all the bars here in Fargo, and then in the summertime we head out to Detroit Lakes and play the lake country there. But like all the other guys in the band, I started really when I was in my 20s, back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so we played in the golden era when every bar was full, and you could play 6 nights a week if you wanted.
It was a different time back then.
It was a totally different time.
People weren't glued to their screens.
That's true. People weren't glued to their screens. So I did that for many years, and then you reach a point where you think, well, maybe I should settle down and get a day job, that kind of a thing. And then I went off to Notre Dame, did a master's in business. Then went off and worked as a consultant, working with the nonprofit world for many, many years. So
really?
So when I came back to this, I kind of come back to it like we call it a paid hobby.
Yeah. So you make money at Stella. And
well, sure. Yeah. We don't play for nothing. You got to cover the cost of the gear and gas.
When you picked it up, so I want to picture actually on the 80s, and just in this segment, I really want to focus on the very first time you picked up a guitar. Like, did you have previous musical, or does that even go back into your childhood? Like,
it goes way back in my childhood. My older brother had a guitar. Dad brought it home for him, and when he was out of the house, I'd sneak into his room and pick it up and fiddle with it. And I just was kind of self-taught. I fell in love with it. He didn't, and so the guitar fell to me. And then eventually, I picked up the classical guitar and studied classical guitar.
So there was no. You didn't take classes. You didn't take any. You just picked it up.
Not until I got to college.
Yeah,
really, not until I got to college.
And after you were already in the band, or when did the?
Oh, well, actually, I played in some bands in high school.
Yeah,
but it wasn't until I got to college that I actually studied music seriously.
When you were in high school, did you think to yourself, like, someday I'm going to make it big, I'm going to be a rock star? And this is like, was that always the dream? Or because you said you kind of gave it up to go get that MBA. I mean,
well, sure, but there's a lot of time between being 16, 17, 18 in high school, and then 5 years in college, and then 3-4 years after college. So there was a period there of about 10 years where I was hoping that, well, you never know if you can get lucky, that kind of a thing.
But a lot of people seem convinced someday I'm going to make it big, I'm going to strike it rich. You never really.
Well, everybody, I think, at the age of 18 has that hope or that expectation, but then reality kicks in.
Some way, somehow. Yeah. For me, it was online competitive gaming, and then I discovered that actually I'm not quite good, right? And that reality hits you really hard when it's like, oh, there's all these people out here. They're much better than I am, but because I'm connected to the internet. So I have to compete against the whole world. Yeah. You're in Fargo, North Dakota, and so you had picked up the guitar as a child. You were sneaking into your brother's room, learning it by ear. Mm-hmm. You had formed some high school bands,
right? Yeah.
Okay, I was almost like a groupie for a band in high school. I just loved these guys, the Decomposers. I don't know if you ever heard of them.
No.
I was obsessed. I would follow them all around town, just listening to their music. I love live music. There's something special about live music. When did you decide? This is what I want to do and make it big? When was it not just something you were fiddling around with in your brother's room, but when was it something that what was it like when you said, okay, we're going to start a band, we're going to do this? Did you reach out to your friends reached out to you?
Well, here's what happened. So, all the high school bands in the early college days and playing in the 80s, you just kind of play the local circuit, right?
No, I don't. So tell me.
Well, so that's kind of. This is Grand Forks, North Dakota, and there's not a whole lot of places relative to Fargo back in the day in Grand Forks to play, but still we'd play 3-4 times a month, kind of a thing, But when we did play back in the 80s, it seems to me that music was more of a special thing. It's not like people lived with pods in their ears and listening to music 24/7.
No Spotify, no YouTube, nothing where you can just whatever you want on demand.
Exactly. I remember when the cassette came out, and we were thinking, damn, that's an improvement. Think about that. That freaks me out even to think about.
Yeah, because you can't put a record in a car. Right,
no,
so
it'll melt. Yeah, I know.
Right, so pre right. So when did cassettes? Because then you can put that in your car and you're driving around.
Was probably early 70s. I'm gonna guess.
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I was born in 1960. In case you're guessing.
Okay.
But so cassettes came out, and then I remember when digital started hitting back in the mid 80s. That was like, oh my gosh. See what happened? And it was a great blessing to musicians because. Guess what? When you're trying to learn a song by ear and it's on cassette, some cassette players play faster than others.
Sure.
So one guy's going to learn the song in the key of F, another guy's going to learn the song in the key of E. You get together, you have an absolute mess in a war.
Yeah, because the playback speed.
Exactly.
Yeah, because it's all on a magnetic strip.
Yeah.
That's crazy, and that's
crazy.
So that was your experience of the '80s, maybe the early '90s.
Right.
Then you give it up.
I give it up.
You just totally give it up. You go, you get a job, a real job,
a day job.
You do consulting, which everybody seems to do nowadays. But in the '90s, I don't think it
was a pretty rare job. I was traveling all over the country working with nonprofit organizations, helping them raise money, building things. I still do that today. In fact, I just got back from Alabama midnight last night.
Okay.
So, but was the way I got into how did I get reinvigorated in music is the question.
Yeah.
Right? So, my wife and I are all for a Sunday dinner, and we're at the Red Lobster in town. The place is packed, so I say to my wife, Stella, that's her name, same name as the band, and I say to her, well, let's just go grab a seat at the bar. So we grab a seat at the bar because there was no wait for that. And then these two vagrants sat down next to us, and these two vagrants just happened to be...
At the Red Lobster?
At the Red Lobster. I mean, they look like homeless people.
Yeah.
Turns out it was Ellen White, the drummer for a band called Yes. Now, yes, that may not mean
at
the Red Lobster in Fargo, North Dakota. This is 7 years ago. Right?
Wow.
So I don't know if your listeners recognize the name Yes, but roundabout all these great hits came out of
those are the hits.
Yeah, and they're still touring after 50 years.
Are they?
Yeah, believe it or not. At least they were back 7 years ago. Anyway, so it was Ellen White, and then his keyboard player, whose name escapes me, but the keyboard player was the very first musician when MTV started back in the early 80s.
Wow.
So I'm a little bit starstruck, right? But I don't want to
a little
starstruck, right? Because these were like the guys that I listened to, back in the 80s
and 90s. They were.
But I didn't want to bug him, let the guy eat his dinner kind of a thing. But I just couldn't help myself. So I struck up a conversation. So my wife is to my right, I'm here, and then it's the keyboard player, that's Ellen White, the drummer for this band called Yes.
Does he know you know who he is?
They told me they were in town to do a concert. I go, really, who are you with? They said, you may not have heard of us, but we're with a band called Yes. And I'm thinking, holy cats, one of my favorite all-time bands, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be like, it's like your mentor icon, is just sat down to have dinner next to you. You're right.
No, so I don't want to derail your story, but I New Year's Eve this year, New Year's Eve this year. New Year's Eve party. I'm dancing with my kids. It comes on randomly on YouTube. Randomly, I'd never heard before. Close to the Edge. That 3-part thing, and I have since been in this. It's been a religious experience for me. I have had an awakening just diving into all of Yes's catalog. So you say, I'm right there with you. Like,
okay, that's cool.
You're
So
meeting them. You're sitting them, and they're right there.
Right. So I'm trying. So we have a little bit of a conversation, and so then I stupidly say to the two guys, "Yeah, I used to play back in the '80s. I played full time for about 5 years." And Alan White at the very end of the bar looks down the bar, looks at me. He says, "You know what that means, don't you?" I go, no. He goes, "You weren't bloody good enough to play six." Because they've been at it for 50 years. Yeah. And they go, well, okay, that's not like British politeness that I expected, But anyway, so his buddy, the keyboard player, kind of starts to smooth things over, and so on and so forth. And then it dawns on me that the reason that when he found out that I was a bass player, what was going on there is Alan White had just lost a bass, his good friend, the bass player, who had played with him for like 50 years. The guy was still grieving. He was like ornery with everybody.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
To make a long story short, we eventually got into a little bit of a conversation as dinner was concluding, and so I looked down the past keyboard player. I said to Ellen, I said, because they had said that he had recorded the Imagine album with John Lennon. He was the drummer on that album.
Oh.
So I said, when you hear that tune, Imagine, does it take you back to that same day, that very place, that very moment that you recorded it? And then his face softens and he goes, bloody hell, you really are a musician. Right? So then we had this wonderful conversation from that point onward. And the reason this dinner dragged on for 2 hours was because Alan wanted some apple pie, and he was waiting on his apple pie. They forgot to bring it to him. Finally, the manager comes out and says, "You know what? I'm sorry, sir, but we're out of apple pie." And he was all upset. I go, "Alan, don't worry about it. I'm going home tonight. You've been so kind to give us backstage passes to go see the concert tomorrow for me and my wife. I'm going to make you an apple pie. I'm going to bring you an apple pie. I'll leave it with the caterers. You're going to get your apple pie tomorrow. Unless you want rhubarb custard." And now Alan is like, bloody, me mom used to make rhubarb custard pie. I haven't had that in 50 years. Now I was the VIP, and he was looking up to me because I had the rhubarb pie, right?
Whoa.
So the next day I go to the concert, but the last thing he says to me before we leave, we're sitting like talking for 2.5 hours. Last thing that Alan White says to me is, "You, sir," as he's shaking my hand, he says, "You, sir, one day will be a great musician." Now, what a nice compliment. Nicest damn compliment I've ever gotten from a guy of that stature, right? But I'm thinking to myself, yeah, what? When I'm wearing wings in the next world or something, right? But here's what's freaky. Yeah. So I go to the concert because I got the 2 free passes.
Wow.
And at the concert, Merle Willard sees me. Now, who is Merle Willard? Merle is now playing with the News. He's a great drummer. And he and I played in our very first band together back in East Grand Forks in 1976. So he sees me. So somehow but he doesn't contact me at the concert because I'm like in a big crowd. But he calls me the next day and says, "Greg, have you been playing?" I go, "Yeah, I've been playing." Fake it till you make it, right? He goes, "Well, the Deadbeats is looking for a bass player. You want in?" I go, "Yeah, sure." So he sends me a set list. I learn the stuff, and that's all about 8 years ago, I started with the Deadbeats. And that's how we got into the whole thing. Then after playing with the Deadbeats for a while, COVID hits. We're doing nothing. I'm saying to Paul Yarber, the lead guitarist, let's do something that's a little bit different. And that's where Stella was born, 5 years ago in the depths of COVID, because nobody had any work, nobody had anything to do. Everybody's worried about getting together with everybody else. We said, screw it. We all got together in a little basement, and we just rehearsed and played and had the time of our life.
What basement was this?
This is where the plot thickens, Conrad. So in the basement in Grand Forks, North Dakota, for my second cousin, Dave Jeffrey. Now, who the hell is Dave Jeffrey? He's now the drummer for Stella. Dave is probably the most mature member of the cast. This guy, I put him out. I have no hesitation saying he's one of maybe the top 10 great drummers in the United States, without a doubt.
Even better than Ringo.
He's in the same category. Nice try.
Yeah.
No, I really think he is. I mean, he played in Arizona. He played in Vegas and all those big shows. Like, they have a big band, like a Tonight Show type band. He played in New York and learned Latin styles in New York. He's played all over. All he did his entire life, to go back to Ellen White's comment about if you're a musician, you've played professionally for 50 years, it means you were good enough to play professionally for 50 years.
Yeah.
Dave was one of those rare birds. He just came home to North Dakota because it's cheaper to retire here. He was the guy that when I was a kid growing up, I always heard about Cousin Dave and Cousin Dave, the famous drummer down south, right?
Yeah.
And he comes back to this area, and we start having a conversation. It was fascinating. I don't know if there's. See, we have the same great-grandfather, right? That's what a second cousin means. We have the same.
Yeah.
So we got some shared DNA.
Mm-hmm.
When Dave and I played together for the very first time, there's this magical bond that happens between some drummers and some bass players where you just get each other. You just feel each other. Dave and I can play, and we can go off. I'll give you an example. Last weekend, we learned Sarah Smile. Beautiful song from Hall & Oates. Complicated as all get out, right?
Yeah.
First time we play through this tune, you can kind of feel like two magnets pulling towards each other. But after the second or third time through the song, it's like we just lock in, And I think that's kind of Stella's claim to fame is we've got just this really, really good beat going on because of that chemistry between me and Dave. And, of course, you had Paul and Brian Nelson on keys. And you've got, I think, a really special
How did you pick the name? Stella, obviously that's your wife's name. Is that the first thing that came, or whenever I launch a new project?
Yeah.
Gosh, I stress about the name for weeks and weeks and weeks.
I did too. I wanted to call it Love Snack. Now that's a great name.
That is a great name. I like
my
it.
wife thought it had too much mental imagination that went with it, and maybe. So I said, but I thought, how do you sell a band where the youngest guy is almost retired? I mean, you got to have some little bait and switch, right? So let's call it Stella, because that's kind of a sexy name, really.
Okay.
It's got some sex appeal to it.
Reminds me of Marlon Brando.
Kind of like that.
Stella!
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing, right?
Well,
your poor wife. She must have.
Yeah, here's the thing.
I don't know if she's probably aware.
You're smarter than most because Marlon Brando, where was A Streetcar Named Desire, is the movie you're thinking of. Where was that shot? That was shot in New Orleans. I spent 13 years in New Orleans working, living, listening to the music. So that whole New Orleans feel is kind of in my bones. So when we founded the band, I said, we need to bring New Orleans to Fargo and get that kind of funky groove, that New Orleans funky groove going down here.
Yeah.
That's why I called it Stella, but I don't think people ain't going to make that connection. But you did. You did.
Yeah. Well, it was the first thing I thought. So then you guys started during COVID. You've been doing it for 7 years. We're going to take a quick little break, and when we come back, we've got Fargo Fun, where we're going to talk about the show that you have coming up this week. You guys do a lot of shows. So we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll have Fargo Fun. So don't go nowhere.